in GST1 of suppliers and GST2A of recipient facilitates auto generation of e-way bills. E-invoicing or electronic invoicing is a system in which B2B invoices are authenticated electronically by GSTN for further use of common GST portal. Under the electronic invoicing system, an identification number will be issued against every invoice by the invoice registration portal, that is IRP, managed with the GST network. The National Informatics Center launched the first IRP at e-invoice 1.gst.gov.in. All invoice information will be transferred from this portal to both the GST portal and e-way bill portal in real time. Therefore, it will eliminate the need for mutual manual data entry while filing the GST1 returns and generation of Part A of the e-way bills, as the information is passed directly by the IRP to the GST portal. So, my dear friends, with this, now I request Ankita Hirawat to deliberate this further on this subject in detail. Before going to deliberations, now I request CA Annavar Sridhar Garu to introduce here to the August gathering. Sridhar Garu.
Good evening, dear members. Sir. Good evening, dear members. I welcome you all for today's virtual meeting on the topic of important practical issues in e-way bill and e-invoicing and the important decisions in GST. Today, let me at the outset, I congratulate the CA Ankita Hirawat for coming forward to take up this session for the first time, and I wish you all the best on behalf of the branch and on my own behalf. Let me introduce CA Ankita Hirawat. She is basically from Rajasthan, but born and brought up in Andhra Pradesh. She is a native of AP, we can say proudly. She has done her articleship with Messrs. Brahma & Co. Visakhapatnam, thereby gaining experience in internal audit, statutory audits, and other practicing areas as a chartered accountant. Being qualified in the year 2021, she joined Hiregange and Associates LLP Visakhapatnam to gain insights, knowledge, and expertise in the field of indirect taxation. With these few words, I introduce Ankita Hirawat to the August Gallery, and I wish you all the best. Ankita ji, please carry on the session. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for the introduction. And I would like to thank our chairman, sir, to give me this opportunity. This is the first time I'm presenting a seminar. So I would really thank him for choosing me to deliver this. So let's get into the topic directly. So is the slide visible?
Yeah, madam. Okay.
Okay, so as sir said that GST is a subject, is a taxation which is right now it is still under implementation stage. Every day there are new notifications, there are new circulars, there are new orders. So right now it will take time for GST to settle down in the Indian taxation system. So, and e-invoicing and e-way bills are the two very important concepts in GST right now. Still, there are many people who think that e-invoice and e-way bill are a mere procedural compliances in GST. While people have started taking e-way bill seriously because non-compliance of e-way bill provisions directly and attract heavy penalties. So obviously to avoid the penalties, people have started taking it seriously. But e-invoicing is still in the eyes of common man a procedural compliance. So as a chartered accountant, it is our responsibility to explain them how important it is to make sure that we comply with the e-invoice provisions so that we prevent ourselves from the future litigations and issues from the department. So e-invoice or electronic invoice. It is a method, it is a way of the government to integrate the invoices with the e-way bills with GSTR 1, that is the outward supplies made by the supplier, and the GSTR 2A or 3B, that is the input tax credit that the buyer of the same goods or services availed in his GST returns. So just one information in the e-invoice portal, it integrates all these provisions in the GST. So, and to avoid these fake invoicing methods, this e-invoice concept has been introduced by the government. So first, let's get into the agenda. Let's see what are the basics of e-invoicing. So e-invoicing was first introduced practically on 1st October 2020, where it was said that a person whose aggregate turnover in the preceding financial year is greater than 500 crores needs to comply with the e-invoice provisions, need to generate e-invoices for all the B2B supplies that he is making. Later on, the preceding previous year was changed to any preceding financial year. So now what we have to see is from 2017-18 to 2021-22, your aggregate turnover, what is your aggregate turnover on all of those preceding financial years. So for 1st October 2020, it was said that above 500 crores, all the B2B invoices needs to be generated using the invoice portal. It was the limit was further reduced in 1st January 2021, saying that the 500 crore limit has been reduced to 100 crores. And then in 1st April 2021, it was further reduced to 50 crores. And now, right now, from 1st April 2022, it has been reduced to 20 crores. So right now, from 1st April 2022, any taxable supplier, any tax registered person whose aggregate turnover is above 20 crores needs to generate e-invoice for all the B2B supplies that he is making. So if you see, within a span of 1.5 years, from 500 crores, they have reduced this turnover limit to 20 crores. Within coming 1.5, 2 years, it is very much visible that they will integrate all the B2B invoices into e-invoice portal. So it becomes a very free flow of GST between the buyer, supplier, and the department. So all the details that the buyer has furnishes in the e-invoice portal goes to the that the supplier furnishes in the e-invoice portal goes to the buyer, and simultaneously the information is sent to the department also. So what is e-invoicing? It has become a myth that e-invoice is one extra burden that has been put on the supplier of goods and services. It is one extra compliance. It is not an extra compliance. Whatever process a businessman used to follow until now, he or she has to follow the same process. It's just that you have to you have to give the information that you have generated the e-invoice, you have generated the invoice on the uh, e-invoice portal, and you have to take the invoice reference number, the unique invoice reference number, and the QR code, which is digitally generated when you give the information of your invoice generated on the portal. Other than that, you don't have to do anything. Today, almost all the softwares, including Tally, are giving this service to the businessman, where they can directly generate e-invoice without any hassle and without any extra efforts. They have to just click on the option e-invoice, generate e-invoice, and the invoice gets automatically generated in those softwares. So what is e-invoicing? it is it is a system where B2B invoices are automatically and electronically, digitally signed by on the GST, on the e-invoice portal. And when you upload it, you have to upload the e-invoice through JSON. When you upload the JSON file, you get the unique invoice reference number, and you get a digitally signed QR code. The digitally signed QR code, it has all the details of the supply that you have made through that particular invoice. Once you scan the digital QR code, you get all the mandatory details that are required while raising a particular invoice. And once e-invoice has been generated, it automatically gets transferred to your GSTR1. It automatically gets transferred to your to the respective buyer's GSTR 2A on real-time basis, avoiding any manual intervention while filing GSTR 1 and avoiding any manual intervention while verifying the actual eligible ITC while filing the GSTR 3B in case of the buyer. So e-invoice was first introduced by amending Rule 48, where they have bought they amended the Rule 48 and they inserted the provision where that a specific class of registered person that the government will notify, they have to include the particulars in Form GST INB 01, and they have to attach the unique invoice reference number, that is the IRN number, on their invoices, and they have to upload the information in the GST common electronic portal. And in electronic portal, this was the first amendment, and simultaneously Rule 46 was also amended, where it stated that every tax invoice that has to be generated using Rule 48, that is thus as where e-invoice is required to be generated, those class of persons need to attach QR code, the unique QR code on their invoices. So without the QR code, your B2B invoice will not be considered as a correct invoice. So the QR code also contains invoice reference number. So if by any chance your client doesn't have invoice reference number on the e-invoice generated, if he has the QR code, it would be enough, because once the person scans a QR code, invoice reference number is automatically shown there, displayed there. Next, what are the transactions and what type of documents are included in e-invoice? E-invoice is has to be generated in case of B2B supplies, in case of exports, and also in case of B2B supplies made to the government. So B2B supplies, even though there are certain supplies where reverse charge is applicable, like if I'm a supplier, or if I'm an advocate and I'm supplying legal services, my supplies are liable to reverse charge under GST, where my recipient will pay the tax under reverse charge. But I'm a registered person. So when I'm a registered person, I have to generate e-invoice even though all my services are liable to reverse charge. But if there are self-invoicing provisions where a person, if he is a recipient of any service which is liable to reverse charge, like if I am if I'm receiving a GTA service, a transportation service, there are self-invoicing provisions where I have to raise a invoice and on self-invoicing basis, and I have to pay tax under reverse charge. In such self-invoicing provisions for reverse charge, I don't have to generate e-invoice. E-invoice is only for outward supplies, outward B2B and outward exports, and outward B2B supplies to the government. If I'm supplying to an SEZ, then also I'm liable to generate e-invoice. But if an SEZ is supplying to another SEZ, then they are not required to generate e-invoice. But if a DTA a person located in domestic tariff area is supplying to SEZ, it will be considered as an export and simultaneously e-invoicing provisions will apply. What documents are required to be generated in the format of e-invoice? First is the regular invoice that the supplier is generating. All the credit notes also, when I'm raising any credit note on my buyer, I have to generate an e-invoice. All the debit notes, I have to generate e-invoice. And because e-invoice is not applicable in case of exempted supplies, you have to generate e-invoice only if you are supplying a tax, you are a taxable supplier, you are supplying taxable goods or services. In case of bill of supply, you are not required to generate e-invoice. And for all the delivery challan, receipt voucher, refund voucher also, you are not required to generate e-invoice. So if I'm a supplier of service and I'm receiving any amount as advance, I have to pay GST on such advance. I'm not required to generate e-invoice on the advance amount received. I will generate e-invoice in the future when uh, I am liable to generate an invoice for that particular supply as per time of supply provisions. Next up, who are the people who are exempted from e-invoice generation? First is a goods transportation agency. A person supplying transportation services as a GTA, as a goods transportation agency, are not required to generate e-invoice for those transportation services provided. Even though he is a person registered under forward charge mechanism, that is, he's paying tax under forward charge, or he is registered under reverse charge, that is, he will not be paying the tax, his recipient will be paying the tax. There are two options given to GTA. One is he can pay the tax under forward charge, or he can shift the liability to the service recipient. In both the cases, he is exempted from generating e-invoice. But if a GTA is providing other type of services like hiring services, usually a GTA also provides hiring of vehicle services, which are taxable, and the person has to pay tax on forward charge basis. In those cases, e-invoice provisions are applicable. So e-invoice exemption is given to GTA only in case of supply of transportation services. The second one is suppliers providing services by way of admission or exhibition in cinematographic films, that is PVR, Inox, etc. The person who is supplying these cinema films in multiplex screens, these type of services are also not required to generate e-invoice. Next, a person who is supplying passenger transport services, these suppliers are also not required to generate e-invoice. Then banking companies, NBFCs, financial institutions, insurance companies. These companies are also not required to generate e-invoice. Next, SEZ units. As I told you, SEZ supplying goods or services, they are not required to generate e-invoice. But if a DTA, a person located in domestic tariff area, is supplying to SEZ, they must raise e-invoice because it is an export in GST. These are the mandatory contents on the e-invoice. These are the same contents which are compulsory when you raise your regular invoice. There are no such differences. There are two additions. That is, one is the QR code that is automatically generated, and the other one is IRN number. That is also automatically given to you by the e-invoice portal. You don't have to generate it. Other than that, whatever mandatory fields that you see are the same fields that you require normally under GST when you raise a regular invoice also. That is, what is the type of invoice, what is the supplier's GST and supplier's address, invoice number, preceding invoice reference, invoice date, whether your supply attracts reverse charge or not, yes or no, GSTIN, state code, place of place pin code, unique, in case there are people who have UIN number, unique identification number, to some certain category of people instead of GSTIN, unique identification number is given. So to those people who don't have GSTIN but have UIN, they have to mention their UINs. Next, to whom we are shipping to GSTIN, to the supplier, to the recipient of the goods, and to which state we are shipping it, and what is the type of supply, what is the transaction mode, whether it is a regular or bill to ship to model type of transaction, or whether it is a regular bill to ship to, it is to the same party, that also we have to mention. Description, quantity, rate, assessable value, GST rate, and whether if it is intrastate, CGST, SGST, if it is interstate, IGST, and total invoice value. So these are the mandatory contents which are required in e-invoicing. Next is, how does e-invoice process flows? As I told you, from the supplier, as soon as the supplier uploads his invoice details in the e-invoice portal, it automatically gets registered in the invoice registration portal, and from invoice registration portal it goes to the e-waybill system and it goes to the buyer, and it sits in the GSTR1 of the supplier. See, like this. Once he uploads the e-invoice containing the GSTIN, etc., the JSON is digitally signed and it goes to the GSTR1, and the API, that is the application program interface, it transfers it to the buyer's GSTR2A. This is what I have explained right now. Next, the IRN and QR code. As I told you, IRN is a 64-digit string. How do you get that unique that invoice reference number is? It is generated basing upon the seller's GSTIN. If you are a supplier, your GSTIN, your document type, your document number, and the financial year. All these four information will be captured, and on that basis, a invoice reference number will be generated, and simultaneously a QR code will be generated. As I told you, the QR code has all the important details that are required in an invoice: seller's GSTN, recipient's GSTN, invoice number, date, invoice value, line items, and the HSN code along with the invoice reference number. So once a QR code and IRN is generated, what you have to do is you have to take a printout, or you can take a printout on your letterhead, and physical copy is not required. You can carry, if you are sending the goods, the driver of the conveyance can have a soft copy of the bill generated, and anybody who wants to inspect your goods, they can scan that QR code and they can get all the details required for the inspection. See, as I told you, there are several modes of generating e-invoice: web-based, API-based. There are many softwares which are generating e-invoice today. Mobile app-based, it is not that relevant right now. There are not many people using the mobile app, and we don't know if there are any glitches in that app, because it is not that prevalent. There is an offline tool also available for generating the e-invoice. The most prevalent is the API based and the web based right now. Printing of e-invoice, as I told, business, once you assign JSON will be generated in the e-invoice portal, and it will be converted into a readable format. You can take the printout of that invoice and you can use it for your reference for sending it to the buyer. But you have to make sure that once you generate e-invoice, within 2 days, you have to take the printout of that e-invoice and you have to keep it with you, or you can save it as a soft copy with you, because after 2 days, if you want to go and view your e-invoice in the invoice portal, it will not be available. So within 2 days of generation of e-invoice, you have to make sure that you have a copy, either soft copy or hard copy of your e-invoice generated. Otherwise, you won't be able to view it. You can view the details uh, by logging in into your GSTR1, but in the GSTR1, you will be able to see the invoice details that you have filled. You can't scan, you can't take the QR code from the GSTR1. So make sure that without any fail, you save your e-invoice once you have generated it. Next, cancellation of e-invoice. Can a supplier cancel his e-invoice after generation? Yes, he can cancel it within 24 hours. Once the time limit of 24 hours is gone, the e-invoice cannot be cancelled. You won't be able to cancel the invoice after 24 hours. And within 24 hours also, if you cancel the invoice, suppose I have generated an invoice 001, and within 24 hours I got to know that there is some mistake in the invoice and I want to cancel it. Yes, you can cancel it because the time span of 24 hours is not over. But once you cancel it, you cannot regenerate an e-invoice with the same invoice number 001. You have to go for the next invoice number 002, or you can generate invoice number 001A, something like that. But with the same invoice number, a second e-invoice cannot be generated. And after 24 hours, as I told you, it cannot be cancelled. So if you come to know about the mistake of in the invoice after 24 hours, you have only one thing possible. You raise either a credit note on the entire value of e-invoice generated and generate a fresh invoice, nullify the first wrong invoice by generating a credit note on this of the same value, and generate a fresh invoice. If you think that is not possible right now, then what you can do is you have to go into your GSTR1 portal and amend your invoice and amend the details of your invoice in the GSTR1 portal, and keep all the reconciliations and etc with you. Because if in future, if the department asks you that there is a difference in your invoice shown in GSTR1 and the invoice that is reflecting in the e-invoice portal, you must be having a proper answer that due to this reason, I had to amend my invoice in the GSTR1, as I couldn't amend it because I got to know about the mistake after 24 hours. Like there is a mistake in the taxable value. I've shown more taxable value of supply in my invoice one. And after 24 hours, I'm not able to reduce it. Obviously, because you can't cancel it, and you did not raise a credit note against it, then you only have the option of amending it in the GSTR1. Next, amendment in e-invoice. Is it possible for you to amend an invoice once generated? Then the answer is no. Once an invoice is generated, you only have an option of cancellation within 24 hours or generate a credit note, debit note in relation to the supply. There is no concept of amendment in the GST e-invoice portal. Next, what are the action points? What are the things that you have to tell to the client to make sure that he is complying with the invoice provisions, or whatever the invoices are coming from his suppliers are under properly are coming through e-invoicing only. So what you can do is you can ask the client to categorize his vendor, that on whose invoices, on which vendors e-invoicing is applicable, and who are the vendors to whom e-invoicing is not applicable. Because as I told you today, if suppose a person's is liable to generate an e-invoice, he has still not generated e-invoice and has sent the goods or supplied the services under a regular normal invoice, not an e-invoice, then in the future, what implications, what litigations that the buyer of such goods or services will get into is the department can question the eligibility of ITC of such invoice. They can say that this invoice is not a proper invoice under GST. How are you eligible to take ITC on such invoice? So this we have to explain it to the clients, and we have to tell them that you have to categorize your vendor, that on these vendors e-invoice is applicable, on these vendors e-invoice is not applicable. One thing how you can categorize is in the e-invoice portal, if you go into search, there is a list of suppliers, there is a list of GSTINs who have generated e-invoice. Suppose I have generated an e-invoice once in October 2020. My turnover was above 500 crores. I have generated e-invoice in October 2020 once. Even if I have generated it once, in the list of GSTINs who are generating e-invoice, my GST number and my name, my legal name of the business will be mentioned in the list, in the Excel sheet, in the list in which the of the GSTINs who are raising the invoice. So you can download that list, and you can a simple VLOOKUP to the supplier, to the vendors of your clients, that okay, on these are the vendors from whom my client is getting inward supplies, and these are the GSTINs who have generated e-invoice. A simple VLOOKUP will filter out all the vendors who have generated GSTINs and on the balance vendors. What you can do is you can go into the GST portal, GSTIN wise, you can search whether they have the turnover of about 20 crores or not. That you can in the GST portal, if you go by GSTIN search, they have the list, they have the details of each GST number, either PAN number or by GST number, the list of the details of all the GSTINs, what type of service or what type of goods they are supplying, from when their GSTINs is active, what is their turnover. So we can capture the turnover from there, and we can understand that okay, on these vendors GSTIN is on these vendors e-invoicing is applicable. Next is you have to ask the client to change their ERP system if it is not able to capture the JSONs for uploading and downloading the e-invoice for uploading the e-invoices e-invoice JSONs on the invoice portal. So accordingly, you have to tell the client to amend, to change the ERP system, so that you don't have to take extra effort. The client doesn't have to take extra effort to upload the JSON on the invoice portal. It has to happen. If the client is using a software, it has to happen in the real-time basis using the software itself, rather than client manually doing it on the offline tool. Next, if possible, the ERP system must be able to capture the QR code and the IRN on inward supplies received by the business. If possible, that can also be done, so that it becomes a check that whether e-invoice has been generated on all those inward supplies or not. Next, the training to the accounts people to generate the e-invoice. It is a very easy process. So once or twice, if we tell them, they can do it in the future. So these are the frequent FAQs asked on e-invoice. First one is e-invoice applicable on branch transfers? Answer is yes. E-invoice is applicable to the branch transfers if the transfer is of taxable goods. If the transfer is of taxable goods, e-invoice will be applicable even on branch transfers. Next is whether export of exempted goods needs to comply invoicing. Then yes, any kind of exports, whether export of taxable products or export of exempted products, they come under the purview of e-invoicing. Is it mandatory to print QR code, and what is the size of QR code to be printed? QR code is mandatory on an invoice generated using e-invoice portal. Without QR code, your invoice is not a valid invoice. because QR code also has invoice reference number. So if you have a QR code, it will be enough. Even if you don't have an IRN, there is not an issue. But if you don't have a QR code, it becomes an issue. Next, is e-invoice required for ISD invoices? Then no. And ISD, input service distributor, is not supplying any goods or service. He is merely generating invoice to distribute the ITC to all the registrations, to all the branches. So for that, e-invoicing is not applicable. Then whether e-invoice is required to be generated for transportation services other than transportation service provided by GTA, then yes. As I told you, for GTA, exemption is limited to only the transportation services. If the GTA is supplying any other taxable service apart from transportation service, e-invoice will be applicable. Next, whether I can generate e-invoice even if my turnover is less than 20 crores, then no. You cannot generate e-invoice if your turnover is less than 20 crores, because e-invoice portal will be enabled only if you are under the turnover bracket of e-invoicing. That is, right now it is above 20 crores. So less than 20 crores, it won't be enabled and won't be able to generate e-invoice if your turnover is less than that. Aggregate turnover includes exempted supplies or not? Then yes. Aggregate turnover means the aggregate turnover defined in GST Act. So aggregate turnover in GST Act includes all the suppliers, all the supplies, B2B, exempted, all taxable, exempted, all the supplies, and that too on pan-India basis. That is, for example, if I have a business in Andhra Pradesh of 50 crores turnover, and if I have a business in Uttar Pradesh of 10 crores, it is for sure that in Andhra Pradesh, I have to generate e-invoice because my turnover limit of 20 crores has crossed. But am I required to generate e-invoice for the supplies made from Uttar Pradesh branch also, because its turnover is only 10 crores? Then the answer is yes, you have to generate e-invoice, because aggregate turnover is calculated on pan-India basis. That is, on a single pan, what is my turnover, even though my GST numbers are different. Whether e-way bill needs to be generated separately in addition to e-invoice. E-invoice portal has an option to generate e-way bill simultaneous to the generation of e-invoice. It is not mandatory. It is an optional field where if you want to, if you are supplying any goods, you want to generate e-way bill also simultaneously with e-invoice. That option is provided in the e-invoice portal. You can generate it, but it is not mandatory. It is an optional field. Because in case of services, if I want to generate an e-invoice, I don't have a need to generate e-way bill. So this option, and people must use this option, because in one go your e-invoice and your e-way bill will be generated. You don't have to put separate efforts for these both. But however, it depends on the supplier. Next, whether e-invoice can be cancelled or amended. As I told you, e-invoice can be cancelled within 24 hours. Amendment or amending the e-invoice is not possible. What are the consequences of non-complying e-invoice provisions? As I told you, in case of buyer, department might question the eligibility of the tax invoice, because under section 16, if you see, you have to have a valid tax invoice document, a tax payment document, if you want to avail ITC on the inward supplies. And if a person is liable to generate e-invoice and he has not generated it, then the invoice document is not a valid document. So the question of ITC comes there, eligibility comes there. And in case of supplier, he must be generating e-invoice. He has not generated e-invoice. There are penal implications, because the invoice generated is not proper. So there are fines and penalties in case of non-generation of proper invoices. Next is when the e-invoicing needed for B2B supplies of exempted products. B2B supplies of exempted products, e-invoice is not required. Whether single e-invoice can be generated for multiple invoices, then the answer is no. For every invoice you have to generate, it is not a separate generation of invoice. Whatever invoice you have generated it in your software, you are just giving the details to the web portal. So if you have generated multiple invoices, then you have to give multiple details in the invoice portal also. There is no provision of generating multiple single invoice for multiple invoices raised. Is there any one-time limit for generation of e-invoice? No, there is no. Is there any time limit for generation of e-invoice? Yes. If you say the GST provisions, you have to raise the invoice before or at the time of supply of goods in case of goods. So there will be accordingly there is a time limit for generation of e-invoice. But right now, e-invoice portal is accepting backdated e-invoice generation also. It will be stopped in future. In the future, if you are generating your invoice today, if you are moving your goods today itself you have to generate the e-invoice. There is no there will not be any provision for backdated or future dated invoices. Backdated invoice and future dated invoice concept will be removed. So if a client is passing backdated entries for his or for his sales, then it is advisable that they change their mode of accounting, because this backdated invoicing will be there will come a time where government won't allow this backdated generation of invoices. Whether the vendor or customer would get any communication upon generation of e-invoice. As I told you, vendor and customer both. In case of vendor, it sits in his GSTR1. In case of customer, in its GSTR2 way, simultaneously on real-time basis. Next, whether e-invoice is required in case of self-invoices for procurements from unregistered or in case of RCM supplies. Then no, e-invoice is not required in case of self-invoices generated for RCM for inward supply of services liable for RCM. Which date would be considered in GSTR1, IRN date or the document date? Right now, yes, there are two different dates, IRN date and document date, because invoice portal is accepting backdated invoices also. But GSTR1 would consider the document date only, it would not consider the IRN date. Next, any monetary limit is there for generation of e-invoice like rupees 50K for e-way bill? There is no monetary limit in case of e-invoice generation. There is only turnover limit for people who are liable, whether they are liable to raising of e-invoice or not. But there is no monetary limit in case of the supplies made like there is in e-way bill. What is the recourse available in case of mistake in the invoice already furnished? As I told you, one recourse is within 24 hours you cancel it. Another is you raise a credit note of the same amount and nullify the invoice and raise another invoice. These two are the, and maintain the documentation, maintain proper reconciliations along with reasons of why you have done it, so that in future if any litigation comes, you are well prepared for it. Is e-invoice compulsorily needed to be carried by the transporter? Invoice is required to be carried. However, a soft copy containing the QR code is enough, because if department wants to inspect the invoices and the documents, he can simply scan it and all the details will be coming out. Can e-commerce entities generate e-invoice on behalf of sellers? Then yes, the sellers can authorize the e-commerce operator, and e-commerce entities on behalf of those sellers who are selling the who are making supplies through their platform, they can generate e-invoice on their behalf. So this is, until now we have seen the e-invoicing under GST. Let's start with the e-way bill. Just a second. So e-way bills under GST, as I told you that e-way bills, people have started taking them very seriously because non-compliance of e-way bills attract immediate and very harsh penalties. Sometimes even undue penalties where every time uh, the supplier who causes the movement of goods needs to prove their genuine nature by going to courts and by taking legal effort, by taking legal help. Let's start with e-way bills. So, introduction. E-way bill was provisions of e-way bills were first introduced by amending the Rule 138 of CGST rules, and e-way bill provisions came into picture. E-way bills is required for movement of goods, and electronic e-way bill, there is a electronic e-way bill portal. You have to generate e-way bill whenever you are moving the goods from one place to another, in case the consignment value is exceeding 50,000 rupees. So if the consignment value is exceeding 50,000 rupees, you shouldn't be moving your goods without the cover of e-way bill. So who has to generate an e-way bill? A person who is causing the movement of goods must be generating an e-way bill. So not a supplier, not a recipient. The rule says every person who causes the movement of goods. Okay, the who causes the movement of goods, a supplier can cause the movement of goods by delivering the goods to the recipient, or a recipient can on ex-factory basis can pick up the goods from the factory of the supplier and he can cause the movement of goods. So anything can happen. So a person who is causing the movement of goods, who is responsible for the movement of goods, must be raising the e-invoice, sorry, e-way bill. Then, and who, in what case e-way bills are required? One is in relation to supply. Goods are being supplied in case of sale, or inter-branch transfers in case of supplies. You have to generate e-way bill for reasons other than supply. What are other than supplies? Job work. A principal is transferring his goods to the job worker for job work purposes, or the job worker uh, after use after a job worker after the necessary production, after the necessary job working that he has to do, he is supplying the goods back to the principal in that cases, or inward supplies from the registered person, unregistered person. That is a registered recipient. I'm a registered recipient, and if I'm getting inward supply of goods from an unregistered supplier, my supplier is unregistered, and I'm receiving the goods from such unregistered supplier, then as a registered recipient, it is my responsibility to generate an e-way bill in while before the movement of goods begins. So, and what is the value? The consignment should exceed 50,000 rupees. If the consignment is below 50,000, up to 50,000, there is no need of generating an e-way bill. This limit of 50,000 in case of intrastate movement, some states have a limit of more than 50,000. Like Tamil Nadu, etc., have a limit of 1 lakh. Other states have a limit of 50,000. But in case of interstate transfers, that is, in case of transfer of goods, supply of goods from movement of goods from one state to another, the value is 50,000 only. In case of within the state, you can search according to which state you stay in. The limit can be more than 50,000. When should a person generate e-way bill? Before the commencement of movement, he has to generate an e-way bill, and he can generate an e-way bill using e-way bill portal in the form GST EWB01. So the EWB01 has been divided into two parts. Part A is for the person the supplier or recipient who is responsible for, who causes the movement of goods, and part B are the transporter details, so he can generate the e-way bill using EWB01. So as I told you, in which cases you have to generate e-way bill in relation to supply, reasons other than supply, and inward supply from unregistered persons. So as I told you, consignment value must exceed 50,000, then e-way bill provisions apply. So what is the meaning of consignment value? How do you derive a consignment value? Consignment value means that the value that is taxable value as per section 15, that is valuation under GST, the taxable value that is derived as per section 15 of this GST Act, plus the taxes, CGST, SGST or IGST. So a consignment value includes the taxable value plus the taxes. And if a single invoice is generated for both taxable supplies and exempted supplies, that is, in one invoice I am sending taxable goods also, I am sending exempted goods also, then in my consignment value, the value of exempted goods won't be included. That is, suppose for example, I have generated one invoice where taxable goods are of worth 30,000 and exempted goods are of worth 30,000. Then while calculating the consignment value, I add 30,000 taxable goods plus taxes related to that 30,000, and I exclude the value of the exempted supply. So after excluding the exempted supply, I see whether my consignment value exceeds 50,000 or not. So in some, there are certain cases where the limit of 50,000 is not applicable. That is, if my consignment value is less than 50,000, still I have to raise an e-way bill. What are those cases? As I told you, principal and job worker. A movement of goods between principal and job worker who are located in different states. In those cases, the 50,000 limit is not applicable. Even though the value is consignment value is less than 50,000, I have to make sure that I'm moving the goods on a cover of e-way bill. Next is in case of handicraft goods. For handicraft goods, there is a specific exemption given where a person who is a dealer in handicraft goods does not have to take state-wise registration if his turnover is less than 20 lakhs. That is, for example, if you see in case of if there is if I have to if there are interstate movement of goods, in irrespective of the turnover limit, I have to take registration under GST. This exemption, this provision is exempted in case of dealer in handicraft goods. He does not have to take registration even if he is transporting the goods to other states until his turnover, his aggregate turnover is under 20 lakh rupees. So in such, for such people, if he is transporting the goods from one state to another, even though the turnover limit is less than 50,000, he has to generate a e-way bill. For others, it is not required. They told you turnover limit for some states, that is Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, etc., it is 1 lakh, and for other states and union territories, intra-state movements, it is 50,000 itself. So information that has to be furnished in e-way bill. E-way bill EWB01 is divided into two parts. Part A is the supplier details and the recipient details, and part B is the transportation details, the transporter, name of the transporter, details of the transporter, the vehicle in which it is getting transported. All this information is furnished in part B. So e-way bill will not be able to be generated unless part B is furnished. So, and part B can be furnished within 15 days of entering details in part A. That is, suppose I'm a supplier, I've entered my invoice details and supply details in part A, then within 15 days of me entering the details in part A, part B can be filled by the transporter or by the supplier or recipient, whatever, whoever it is, within 15 days of entering the details in Part A. So these are the Part A and Part B, whatever details are required. In Part A, all the invoice document details, the shipping details, the consigner, consignee details, the quantity item descriptions, etc. are to be mentioned in Part A. And in Part B, the transportation vehicle details, the type of transport used, etc. has to be filled. So there is one relaxation for the movement of goods within the state. That is, if suppose I am a supplier and I have to make a movement of goods, then from my place till the uh, place of business of the till the transporter's place, if it is with up to 50 kilometers from my place until the transporter's place, I don't have to fill Part B of GST EWV1. I can send the goods under the cover of EWB01 by filling the Part A only. In which case, when I'm transporting the goods from my place to the transporter's place for further supply. So if the transporter's place is within the range of 50 kilometers, I don't have to fill the Part B of my EWB01 up to 50 kilometers, but only in case of supply from my place, the supplier's place to the transporter's place. Next, what is the validity of e-way bill? The validity of e-way bill, in case the distance covered that has to be covered is 200 kilometers, it will be 1 day for the vehicle other than over-dimensional cargo. Other than over-dimensional cargo vehicle and regular transportation vehicle, it will be 1 day for every 200, for up to 200 kilometers, and after 200, for every 200 or part, there will be 1 additional day given. So in case of vehicles other than over-dimensional cargo, up to 200 kilometers 1 day, and for after that, for every 200 kilometers or part thereof, there will be 1 additional day given. And in case of over-dimensional cargos, vehicle carrying over-dimensional cargo, it will be 20 kilometers for 1 day, and after that, for every 20 kilometers or part thereof, 1 additional day will be given. And the validity of e-way bill can be extended within 8 hours of expiry of the within 8 hours of the expiry of the e-way bill. So if I feel that due to some unforeseen circumstances, I need to extend, I won't be able to transport within the validity period of e-way bill. There is a provision where before the expiry of e-way bill, you can extend the validity, but you cannot do it after expiry. Before expiry of e-way bill, there is a provision where you can extend the validity of such e-way bill. Next, cancellation of e-way bill. It is same as e-invoice. Within 24 hours of generation, you can cancel the e-way bill. So if I've generated an e-way bill today and I've noticed there is some mistake, then within 24 hours, I can cancel such e-way bill. But once that e-way bill and the conveyance has been verified during the transit, even though the period of 24 hours is not over, I will be able to cancel such e-way bill once it has been verified. That is, today, if I have generated an e-way bill and I have started and my goods have started the movement. I have started the movement of goods. The transport of the goods is the goods are in transportation stage, and it has been a department person has verified the e-way bill during the transit. Within 4 hours of generation of e-way bill, my e-way bill has been verified in transit. In that case, I won't be able to cancel my e-way bill even though period of 24 hours is not over. Next is acceptance of e-way bill. So the person who is raising the e-way bill, who is causing the movement of goods, has to raise the e-way bill, and the other party, that is, suppose a supplier is raising the e-way bill, the other party, the recipient of the goods, can accept or reject the e-way bill. It will be reflecting in his e-way bill portal. He can either accept or reject that e-way bill. Such e-way bill will be deemed to be accepted if if it is not rejected within 72 hours of the details made available to such recipient, or at the time of delivery, whichever is earlier. If there is no specific rejection, then this such e-way bill generated will be deemed to be accepted by the other party. So there are certain important points that in case of one consignment, one document, one e-way bill. So for multiple documents, they cannot be clubbed and one e-way bill cannot be generated. Suppose I have raised 10 invoices. For all those 10 invoices, I have to raise separate e-way bills. I cannot club all those documents and generate a single e-way bill. And in case of multiple consignments for single invoice, for example, I've generated one invoice, and my goods on such for which I have generated that one invoice has to go in lots. That is in lots, or they are in SKD or CKD form, that is semi knockdown or complete knockdown. That is, I have removed the parts of those goods and they get assembled at the location of the recipient. So they are in semi knockdown or complete knockdown condition. In those cases, I have to say send those goods. I have to move those goods in separate consignments. So I have to use multiple consignments. In such cases, you have to generate multiple e-way bills. So for a single invoice, I can generate multiple e-way bills if I am transferring the goods in lots. But in case of multiple documents, I cannot club them and generate a single e-way bill. Next is e-way bill cannot be edited or amended. It can only be cancelled. It cannot be edited and amended. But transportation, the vehicle details. Suppose I want to update my vehicle details for some part of the journey, one vehicle has been used, and for the other part of journey, another vehicle has been used. I can update the vehicle details any number of times, but other than that, I cannot amend my e-way bill in any case. Next, what are the provisions of law under which e-way bill is required? So section 68 subsection 1 says that carrying of e-way bill is mandatory. The government may require the person in charge of consignment to have to carry with him such documents as prescribed. So in the rules, e-way bill has been compulsorily prescribed, and section 68 subsection 1 says you have to carry e-way bill because it is one of the major document that is required in case of movement of goods. And that e-way bill must be a valid e-way bill, that says section 68 subsection 2, that it must be a valid e-way bill. And section 68 subsection 3 states, gives a power to the proper officer that he can inspect the goods, he can inspect the documents he can intercept the conveyance, he can stop the conveyance, and he can inspect, he can ask for producing the documents, and he can verify those documents, and he can also inspect the goods in transit. So that power has been given to the proper officer in section 68 subsection 3. So these are the rules which are formulated for complying with e-way bill provisions. Section 138 is the main e-way bill generation, where before the movement of goods, you can generate the e-way bill in EWB01. And 138A specifies the documents that is required to be carried by the person in charge of the vehicle. That is the invoice, e-way bill. In case of import of goods, it must be bill of entries, etc. So what are the documents required? That is mentioned in section 130, in rule 138A. 138B allows the verification of such documents and conveyance by the proper officer. 138C allows the inspection of goods, And if the goods are inspection, a summary report has to be updated in EWB 03. And finally, a final report must also be updated. 138D provides uploading information in case of vehicle detained. If vehicle is detained for more than 30 minutes, such information and reasons for detention must be uploaded in EWB 04. And 138E is blocking and unblocking of e-way bill. So there are certain persons for whom the e-way bill has, for whom the generation of e-way bill is blocked by the department, blocked by the government. Who are those people? We will see sooner. Next, consequence of non-compliance. I have told you under which section and which rules e-way bills are liable to be generated. Now, what if I have not generated a e-way bill in case of movement of goods? There are heavy penalties. The first penalty is under section 122, which says that if e-way bill is not generated without a cover of e-way bill or invoice, if a person is moving the goods, the penalty will be 10,000 or the tax on such goods evaded. So if a person is not generating e-way bill, it is deemed that it is for evasion of tax. It becomes very difficult to prove your authenticity that this is a genuine mistake if there is no e-way bill generated in case of movement of goods. The penalty will be 10,000. 10,000 meaning 10,000 CGST and 10,000 SGST each. And or the tax that payable on such goods, whichever is higher. So the bare minimum penalty will be 10,000 in any case. Next comes the penalties under section 129. So if the vehicle is intercepted during transportation and it is without the cover of e-way bill or the e-way bill is not proper, in that cases there are two penalties under section 129 will be applicable. Excuse me. There are two situations in this case. If the owner of those goods comes forward to pay the penalty, that it's okay, I have made a mistake and I'm ready to pay the penalty, or the owner of the good is coming forward. In that case, in case of taxable goods, it is 200% of taxable value as penalty. Earlier, it was 100% tax and 100% penalty. This is a recent amendment where the 100% tax and 100% penalty has been converted into 200% of tax as penalty, because when there was 100% tax and 100% penalty, so many taxpayers started complaining that it is against the constitution. It says that because on the taxable goods, however, I am paying tax, and again I am being levied tax of 100% in case of detention. So it becomes double taxation. It is not as per the constitution on which the GST has been drafted. It is wrong. So these were the arguments provided. So in that case, now now government has changed the parameters. They have said, okay, don't pay 100% tax and 100% penalty. Pay 200% of the tax as penalty only. So now 200% is my penalty in case of taxable goods, and in case of exempted goods, it is 2% of the value of goods. The invoice value of goods, 2% of the invoice value, or 25,000, whichever is less, will be the penalty in case of exempted goods. This is the case if the owner comes forward to pay the penalty. If the owner doesn't come forward to pay the penalty, that is in case where instead of owner, someone else claims that he'll pay the penalty on behalf of the owner, or he'll comply with the provisions on behalf of the owner. In such cases, that on taxable goods, 50% of the value of goods or 200% of the tax payable, whichever is higher. So 50% of the value of my invoice value or 200% of the tax payable, whichever is higher, will be the penalty on the taxable goods, and on the exempted goods, it will be 5% of the value of goods or 25,000, whichever is less. So these are the two situations in where penalty comes in case of section 129. So if the person doesn't have the cash as on that particular date, he says that he doesn't have the cash, he won't be able to pay it right then in case of detention, then he can release his goods and the conveyance by furnishing a bond taken from the bank that I'll pay the tax later. Right now, the cash is not there with me. I'll pay it later. So release my goods. So under the cover of the bond, the goods will be released. Next, as I told you, under the cover of the bond, the goods will be released, and where the and if the person doesn't come forward to pay the amount, or if he doesn't come forward and he fails to produce the goods on the appointed date by the officer, then the security in the form of bond that is submitted to the proper officer to the department, that can be encashed, and all the tax and penalties can be settled by using that particular bond. So, in case of detention and seizure, first, a show cause notice will be issued under section 129 subsection 3. Before a penalty order is issued, a show cause notice will be issued asking asking this person to show cause as to why a penalty or a penalty must not be levied in case of non-compliance of e-way provisions, and an opportunity will be given. Opportunity of being heard will be given. In against the show cause notice, a reply has to be filed, and accordingly, if the officer is satisfied with the reply, he'll drop it or he'll issue an order for payment of penalty. Satisfaction, it is a very rare case. Usually, a order is passed where unless a payment is made of the penalty, however, how much ever the genuine cause is of the non-compliance, the penalty has to be paid before the goods are released from the detention. The officer usually doesn't listen to any of the genuine causes that is happening right now, because today e-way bill is the most litigative provision in GST right now. There are n number of cases regularly going to the courts, where the court is even questioning the authenticity of the officers in case of in judging the taxpayers, because even for small minute mistakes, a heavy penalty is being levied. Section 129 was brought into picture to curb, to levy penalties on the people who are involving in fraud or misrepresentation. But it is being levied on every other person, even though the mistake is genuine or he is not able to comply with the provisions due to some unforeseen circumstances. Such has become the case right now. So if in case of section 129 subsection 6, if there is no payment made within 15 days of receipt of order copy, the goods that are detained can be sold and disposed of within 15 days if the payment is not made. Within 15 days, if the payment is not made, or whatever it is, the goods and conveyance both can be detained, or that were detained or seized can be sold or disposed to reimburse the tax and penalties. So for the conveyance, there is one more amendment given, that the transporter can release the conveyance if he is agreeing to pay the penalty of 1 lakh or the tax payable, whichever is less. If he is ready to pay such penalty, then he can release his conveyance and not the goods, only the conveyance. The transporter can release the conveyance and take it with him. But in case of goods, within 15 days of receipt of order, if it is not given, if the payment is not made, then the goods can be sold or disposed of. So these are the actions post inspection that I told you right now. So rule 138E of CGST rules. As I told you, there is a rule which blocks the generation of e-way bill to certain category of persons. So what are those category of persons? If the person is a composite supplier, if the person is a composite supplier who has not filed his GST return, that is for composites, if has not filed his GST return for 2 consecutive quarters, the GST composite taxpayer has to quarterly file his returns. So if he has not filed his quarterly return for 2 consecutive taxpayers, he will be blocked from generating e-way bill until he complies with the GST return filing process. And in case of regular supplier, if for 2 consecutive tax periods he has not filed his GST return meaning GSTR 3B, GSTR 3B, if he has not filed for 2 consecutive tax periods, then he will be blocked from generating e-invoice until the non-compliance is rectified. Then comes the person who are filing, who are regular taxpayers but under QRMP scheme. So the regular taxpayers, certain people who are under regular scheme, still they can file based on the turnover limit. They can file their GSTR 1 on quarterly basis. They can file their return on quarterly basis. In such cases also, if they are not filed the quarterly returns for 2 consecutive quarters, their GST register, their e-way bill generation will be blocked. They won't be able to generate e-way bill in such cases, and the person whose registration has been suspended. So if a person's registration has been suspended, such supplier will not be able to generate e-way bill. It will be blocked. Earlier, when this rule was introduced, it was to both supplier and recipient. That is, if a recipient is causing the movement of goods and he is not filed the GST returns of consecutive tax periods, 2 consecutive tax periods, he won't be able to generate e-way bill, both the supplier and recipient. Later on, it was amended that this rule will be this suspension of generation of e-way bill, this blocking of e-way bill will be applicable only in case of supplier. Recipient, if he is causing the movement of goods, he can he'll be able to raise the e-way bill even though he has not filed the GST returns for the consecutive quarters. Next, because the proper officers were regularly levying penalty for every minute mistakes in the e-way bill done by the taxpayer, CBIC issued a circular where they stated that if there are these minor mistakes or the mistakes that are similar to these mistakes, then you don't have to levy harsh provisions of section 129 on such minute mistakes. You can levy a penalty to the tune of 500 rupees, the basic penalty, and you can leave the goods. What are such mistakes? One is if there are spelling mistakes in the name of consignor or consignee. Other details are perfect. There are certain spelling mistakes in the name, or there is an error in the address of the consignee. Okay, which does not affect the place of supply. The minute error in the address to the extent of locality, etc. Or there is error in 4 to 6 digit of HSN. That is, the first 2 digits of HSN are correct. After that, for the next 2 or next 4 digits, there has been a mistake in the classification of goods, where first 2 digits of HSN are correctly captured. That also is a minor mistake. Harsh penalties are not required to be levied on that. Next is error in the PIN code. Address is correct and there is certain error in the PIN code, that will be treated as minor mistake provided such error does not uh, lead to extension, increase of the validity of e-way. Okay, the error is of the PIN code is minute. It does not involve in increasing the validity of e-way. This will be a minute mistake that can be ignored. Okay, error in one or two digit of the document number. The document number, the entire document number is not a faulty. There are one or two digits which are errored in the document number, then also it is fine. Or in the vehicle number, there is error in the one or two digit or characters of the vehicle number. Other details are perfect. The vehicle number is mismatched due to error in one or two digits or characters. That is also a minute mistake. There is no requirement of levying harsh penalties in such cases. But today, even though this circular has been issued, there are so many cases where in case of such minute mistakes of wrong selecting wrong vehicle type, everything else is correct, perfect. By mistake, due to some technical error, the supplier or the transporter has selected wrong vehicle type. Even for such small mistakes, the very harsh penalties are levied and the goods are detained unless the penalties are paid. So these are certain judicial decisions which came in the favor of the SSC, stating that first is KB Enterprises versus Assistant Commissioner of State Taxes, where the issue was that penalty, there was error in mentioning of vehicle number. If everything else is correct, there is only error in mentioning of vehicle number. That does not mean that this error was made due to for keeping in point of the evasion of tax. This was not due to evasion of tax. There was no intention to evade the tax. These are regular minor clerical mistakes. These are not required. Such penalties are not required to be levied in such small mistakes. The next one is if there is incorrect distance mentioned in the e-way bill due to telegraphic error, resulting in expiry of validity period. So due to such incorrect distance mentioned, due to some certain technical or telegraphic error, the e-way bill expired before reaching the destination. So address of the supplier, address of the recipient is correct. There is some mistake in mentioning the distance. So due to which the before reaching the place of the recipient, the validity of e-way bill expired. So that does not question the genuinity of the taxpayer. That does not mean that the taxpayer has intention of evade the taxes, to evade the taxes. So in this case also, uh, penalties under section 122 and 129 are not required to be levied. Next, one more case is incorrect mentioning of number of tax invoices as tax invoice number in e-way bill, or the detention of goods under undervaluation. So undervaluation concept, it is not it cannot become a ground for detention under 129. You have to make sure that the proper e-way bill has been generated for the e-invoice raised. Whether the e-invoice, whether the invoice raised is undervaluation of goods or overvaluation of goods, that you have to take it under that you have to see it under different sections under GST. For under section 129, it is not a ground to detain the goods for the reason of undervaluation. In case of wrong classification, if there are if there is genuine reason of wrong classification, then due to certain mistakes, normal regular mistakes of the supplier, that does not mean that it is an it is a supply, so it is a supply made, or it is a intentional mistake made to evade taxes. So in that case also, relief was given to the SSC. Detention of the goods on ground that the vehicle took different route or reached wrong destination. In such case also, if due to some genuine reason or error, if the vehicle has taken a wrong route or a different route and reached a wrong destination, that there must be some bona fide relief must be given to the transporter and the supplier or recipient. This cannot be a ground to levy penalties under section 129. These are the same. All these are same cases. Yeah. Apart from this, there is one very prevalent issue in case of where the goods are detained. That is due to unforeseen circumstances, the e-way bill has been expired and it was not the e-way bill, the validity of e-way bill was not extended before the expiry of such way bill due to certain unforeseen circumstances. So this particular case is very prevalent right now. The goods are being detained because it was they were moving on the cover of an expired way bill. So in these cases, the high courts have a distinct view. In certain high courts, the genuinity of the transaction is being considered and what are the issues that the transporter or the supplier recipient has faced is considered, and depending upon that, a decision is given, mostly in the favor of the SSC. And there are other high courts where they say that expiry of e-way bill, if the portal is giving you an option that you can extend the validity of e-way bill. Still, if you have not extended it, then it is non-compliance of the provisions under e-way bill provisions under GST, and penalty is leviable. So in these cases, the high courts have there are different views given by the high courts. Some say that if there are genuine concerns, it is okay. It does not, penalties must not be levied, but some others say that strict compliances of laws must be required to be made. That's it, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your patient listening.
Members, are you having any doubts or you want to take any clarification? So,
Sir, sir, I want to know the case law for wrong vehicle number mentioned wrongly. Case law I want.
Vehicle number mentioned wrong.
You have given the PPT, but I could not see it.
Okay, sir. 1 second.
Second. KB Enterprises.
Error in mentioning the vehicle number. KB Enterprises versus Assistant Commissioner of State Taxes and Excise.
Thank you.
Okay.
KB Enterprises versus CCS. Okay, thank you.
members, you want any more details or any clarifications regarding this GST of this e-invoicing or e-way bill? Madam has presented a...
Sir, we can get a copy of we can get the PPT in a mail?
Yeah, that will you send it.
Okay, sir.
Excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
In spite of even though it is the first presentation, she has presented excellently well. So really, first I thought that this is a regular speaker, but again I am remembered myself. Oh, this is not the regular speaker. She is the first speaker. But really wonderful, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. You have given me this opportunity.
Really excellently well. Members, are you having any doubts regarding so far this e-way bill and e-invoicing?
Madam, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
This is Prashant, Vice Chairman of the branch, madam.
Hello. Sir.
Really, I'm appreciating your presentation. From the initial parts of the e-way bill till now, you explained very well, madam. I have request small clarification regarding the e-way bill.
Yes, sir.
Actually, within the district or within the city limits, if one company like having a chain stores and one godam, so godam, if they're sending goods to their chain stores, the requirement of the e-way bill and the condition of the 50,000 is it applicable for all because there are different opinions regarding this branch transfer or within the city.
Sir, in case of branch transfers, I would say e-way bill is applicable if you are within the city limit, if you are transferring it to your own branches, because e-way bill provision says that 50 kilometers limit is applicable only where you are transporting, you are sending your goods for further transport to the place of transporter. So other than the place of transporter, wherever you are transporting your goods, if the value is above 50,000, you have to generate e-way bill. Even in case of branch transfers, you have to generate e-way bill within the state if the limit is above 50,000.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And we feel very much happy for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Any member, are you having any doubts or any clarification you want?
Madam, in case of e-invoice,
Yes, sir.
date was mentioned wrongly.
Okay.
We can amend through GST 1 column 9 now, madam.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, sir. If any mistake that has been done in e-invoicing and the cancellation option is not available to you, it's not, you cannot cancel it, then the only option that is available is changing it in GSTR 1. You can only change it in GSTR 1. You cannot change it anywhere else. And if the department, due to any reason, questions you in future that why you have changed it, then you need to be ready with the answer that by mistake, the invoice number or the amount has been mentioned wrongly. So I had to change it to GSTR 1.
So credit note is not required now, madam. All that process. Better we do it in GST 1 is sufficient now. Only date is wrong.
Yes, sir. It is sufficient. If credit note is not required, you just have to maintain the reconciliation of why you have changed the dates. Other than
Yes.
that, dates, it's not required.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Wonderful session, madam.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, any other member wants any clarification, sir? Please unmute yourself and ask me. Sir, N.S. Prakash Ragaru. If any member could not able to unmute, please put it in chat box. That question. Otherwise, you so, madam, so you have considered our request and immediately you responded. Thank you. Now I request our Secretary of the branch, C. Anil Paul sir, to propose vote of thanks.
A very good evening to the members of the Visakhapatnam branch of SIRC of ICI. At the outset, I would like to begin my presentation of vote of thanks by congratulating CA Ankita Hirawat and thanking her for having made a wonderful presentation. You would stand as an inspiration for all the young chartered accountants to come up and make presentations and inculcate this habit of speaking in larger forums. It's a very good initiation that you have taken. We would like to thank you, and not taking any credit out of the presentation that you have made. It has been a very wonderful presentation on the e-way bill and the invoicing, and the practical issues have been well explained. I thank you on behalf of the Visakhapatnam branch as well as the managing committee of the Visakhapatnam branch of SISC for having made a wonderful presentation. We would like to see you again, either in virtual or in physical mode, and love to have you make more presentations before the members. Thank you very much, Ankita Hirawat. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I will be looking forward to get such opportunities again.
Sure, sure.